Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you for being here. My name is Maurizio Benazzo.
My name is Zaya Benazzo, and welcome to this conversation from Palestine to the world on the global struggle for liberation with Angela Davis and Gabor Maté. This conversation is part of a series on talks we are organizing on Palestine that will be released along with our new film called Where Olive Trees Weep, which we filmed with Dr. Gabor Maté in 2022,
May 2022.
in the occupied West Bank, where we follow him. He was offering trauma healing work for Palestinian women who have been in prison and some of them tortured in Israeli prisons.
And I want to read a brief bio, which I know it's completely unnecessary, but never know in life. Angela Davis is an international renowned activist, scholar, and writer who has dedicated her life to combat oppression in the US and abroad, with a commitment to prisoners' rights and a powerful critique of racism in the criminal justice system. Gabor Maté, renowned Canadian physician and author, his work explores addiction, childhood trauma, and human development. His last book, The Myth of Normal, is a powerful critique of the impact of modernity and capitalism on our well-being. Just have to add, Angela, as a teenager in Italy, Angela Davis has been my hero. Her and Che Guevara were giving me the strength to combat and to be a rebellious young teenager in Italy. And to me, it's such an honor to be here. So I bow to this moment, and thank you.
Gabor and Angela, you have both been advocating for Palestinian rights for decades. Does this moment feel any unique or different than any other times before? And just, Gabor, I remember when we were in the West Bank, you said, I don't hope to see any change in my lifetime. And I wonder, that was 2 years ago. I wonder if that might have changed for you. Maybe we start, yeah.
When I said that, I meant that I don't expect to see any dismantling of the Zionist apparatus. I don't see any easing in the occupation. I see nothing more than further imposition. Angela and I have been, in ways, engaged with the struggle for a long time. And over that period of time, we've seen the occupation get more stark, more oppressive, more brutal, less even willing to hide its depredations from the public. The change that I have seen since October the 7th, lo and behold, the New York Times in the last 2 days had some pretty decent articles talking about what the occupation actually looks like and the crimes of the occupation and the experience of the Palestinians. I didn't expect to see that. Yeah. And I didn't expect to see the massive uprisings in favor of Palestinian rights, in favor of the truth that we've witnessed since October the 7th. Angela said a long time ago that the Palestinian issue is a moral litmus test for all of humanity. I didn't expect to see that litmus test become so clear to so many people. So that's the change that I've seen.
Angela, you have anything to add to that?
Oh, yes. This is, on the one hand, a very, very difficult moment because we've seen an escalation of violence and torture, intensification of Zionism, and so many Palestinian people are suffering. But at the same time, I know I have never experienced such a moment of hope for the cause of Palestinian freedom. And I think it's important to recognize that when we are involved in these struggles for liberation, around the world, oftentimes there is no clear vision of what the outcome will be. There are no guarantees. But at the same time, we have evidence that our activism does make a difference. The work we do does make a difference. And even though we may not know when we will see the evidence of that difference, I think that is what we have to keep at the center of our vision. Like Gabor, I never really expected to experience something like this global surge in support around the cause of Palestinian freedom. But on the other hand, I knew, and I have known, that if we continue the struggle, that one day the fruits of our struggle will become manifest. And I think that, those of us like Gabor and myself who've been involved in this movement for decades and decades, we're really privileged to be able to see some of the consequences of the work that so many people have done over so many decades. So I think that, those who are often very sad that they don't see immediate results can learn from this experience, not only with respect to the cause of Palestinian liberation, but the cause of global freedom. People all over the world, in the Sudan and Haiti and in other places where people continue to suffer.
Angela, I have a question for you. When I looked at my Instagram website, there's, announcing this conversation between you and I, there was the usual enthusiastic hellos, there was the acknowledgements, then there were the usual impersonal insults to either or both you and I. That's just par for the course. But one comment that I did see a number of times is all this talking and nothing's going to change. And it's true, I have to admit, this conversation is not likely to save the life of or the living a little finger of one Palestinian baby, or for that matter. And I have to say the tragedies on both sides. I mean, I looked at some list of Israeli soldiers killed in the last week or two. They listed four Israeli soldiers dead last week. So-and-so, Sergeant so-and-so 19, Sergeant so-and-so 19, Sergeant so-and-so 19, and the fourth Sergeant so-and-so 19. Imagine a society that where 19-year-olds are sergeants and they're dead, And so, not that I'm equating the suffering or the responsibility on both sides. That's the last thing that I do. What I'm addressing is, for all this talking that we do, it's true, we're not going to save a single life. So I'm not asking this cynically, and I suppose it's a rhetorical question because I have my own answer. But what is your answer to this question of, we can do all this talking and advocating and activism, it's not going to save a single life?
Well, Gabor, I think that if one simply considers one instance, then yeah, of course, one conversation will never make a difference. One individual may never make a difference. And of course, we who live in the West are accustomed to think with those terms. We see the individual as the unit of society. We focus myopically on single experiences. But if one takes all of them together, if one multiplies this conversation by 1,000 or 1,000,000, if one multiplies the protests that are themselves multiplying all over the world, one can begin to see a difference. And I think that what is perhaps so important during this period, especially, is to imagine ourselves not as single individuals, imagine our acts not as isolated acts, but connected to vast numbers of people and vast numbers of protests all over the world. That is what is capable of bringing about change.
Can you tell you why in your life you've considered Palestine such a moral, as I have, by the way, too, such a moral litmus test for the whole world? And in one of your books, you talk about an amazing incident where you were, when you were in jail yourself in 1970, I think it was, and then you were tried on quasi-terrorism charges, and you were eventually acquitted. But you received many messages of support and solidarity from people all over the world, including from Palestine, including from Palestinian prisoners. And then when you went to Palestine yourself, you actually met some of these people who were prisoners at the time when you were a prisoner, and they had supported you. It was a serendipitous meeting. Well, apart from your personal experience, why is Palestine such a lodestone, such a litmus test for the whole world? I think it is. I'd love to have your words explaining why.
Well, first of all, let me say that I have quoted my friend, my close friend and comrade, who's no longer with us, the poet, the Black feminist poet June Jordan, who said many, many years ago that Palestine was a moral litmus test. So I just want, I want to make sure that people recognize June Jordan as someone who was a pioneer, calling upon people all over the country, all over the world, and especially calling upon people involved in movements for Black liberation to stand up for Palestinian freedom. I truly believe that Palestine is a moral litmus test. That one's position on Palestine is indicative of one's sense of what global liberation is all about. So that when we support Palestine, we're not saying that we only support Palestine. We're saying that we support struggles for freedom and liberation all over the world. And precisely because of the tenacity of the Palestinian people, precisely because they have refused to give up since 1948, since 1967. When I visited Palestine in 2011, I talked to a man who was a storekeeper, a conversation in the course of purchasing something at his store. And he said to me, as long as there is a single olive tree left in Palestine, we will fight for the liberation of our people. And that has stayed with me. And I think that is the reason why we point to Palestine as indicative of struggles for liberation all over the world. Black people have been very much inspired by the struggle in Palestine. People in other parts of the world have been inspired by that. And we know that if we manage to defeat Zionism, we will be able to defeat racism everywhere. We will be able to defeat we will have a sense of what it means to engage in struggles to overturn racial capitalism, from Palestine to Alabama, let me say.
I think there's something unique about Zionism that you touch upon in one of your pieces. You talk about that Israel is not only the purveyor of a colonial settler project, but also one that actively continues its violent expansion in the 21st centuries. Now, the last 7 months, I have to say, have been the heaviest, darkest time of my adult life. I mean, and this is subjective for me, and maybe it's my Jewishness and my own close relationship to the issue. I don't know what it's like for you. You've lived through the same times that I've lived through: the Vietnam War, the civil rights struggle, the South Africa apartheid, and struggle. But there's something about this, and I'm not talking about numbers of deaths, because I mean, in Iraq, 500,000 civilians were killed not that long ago. In Vietnam, millions of people died. But there's something about the quality of it that seems even more deeply disturbing and upsetting for me than what I've seen elsewhere. And I don't know if that's true for you, but I think what it is for me is, yes, this is a colonial settler project. It had to become one, otherwise it couldn't have succeeded. But it's almost like we're seeing world history in speeded up fashion in a few months, because this is went on for centuries here in North America. This is what went on in Africa for centuries and decades and so on. But here it's almost like we're seating up on our TV sets and our Instagrams and our TikToks, and we're seeing it in real life. It's almost like we're looking at this horrendous version of our own past, speeded up and magnified. I don't know if it strikes you that way, but it's like the whole colonial history is like shown us now in its untrammeled horror, and we can't avert our eyes.
Yeah, thank you so much for making that point. And I would add that the influence of Zionism has been so powerful that it has blurred people's vision who are otherwise take progressive positions about the need to support human rights in the world. This phenomenon of progressive accept for Palestine.
Yeah.
It's something that we have been challenging for a very long time, and it continues. It continues today. And as someone who went to a Jewish university, I attended Brandeis University, so that and I come from the segregated South. As a matter of fact, I grew up in the city that was the most segregated city in the country. And our first white allies were Jewish people.
Yeah.
So, I grew up with this sense of the need to challenge anti-Semitism, but at the same time, when I found out what was happening in Palestine early on, attending a university that was founded in the very same year as the State of Israel, I learned from my Jewish friends about the contradictions. And so I grew up with a sense of the need both to challenge anti-Semitism and to stand with Palestinian people struggling against the settler colonial violence inflicted by Israel. So I would say that that has been the most difficult issue, the assumption that if you are against anti-Semitism, then you have to be opposed to the Palestinian struggle for freedom. If you are against anti-Semitism, you have to stand with the State of Israel. And my experience has been that progressive Jewish people are the ones who have given leadership to the struggle precisely because they recognize the kinship between what is happening in the occupation of Palestine and what happened historically in terms of the Holocaust. So I think that the contradiction, the apparent contradiction, is something that we have to recognize is not a contradiction. To be opposed to anti-Semitism, to be opposed to racism, to be opposed to settler colonialism and its impact on the Palestinian people is one struggle, one global struggle for human rights.
I think one aspect of that difficulty is that Zionism isn't just a standalone movement. It's very much embedded and interwoven with the much larger and much more powerful imperial project. So therefore, as long as the empire and its media acolytes see Zionism as necessary to their purposes, it's very difficult for people here to even hear the other side. And as I mentioned earlier today, perhaps, for 2 days in a row now, the New York Times, I take my hat off. I'm also almost speechless, has presented today and yesterday 2 articles that actually tell the truth about the occupation. But that's extraordinarily unusual. And usually, and for decades, the emphasis has been on the violence of the other side. And at some point, you actually write, I'm just going to quote you if I may, you say, and you wrote this in your book, Freedom is a Constant Struggle, published in 2016. So lest anybody thinks that history began on October the 7th, we've been talking about this for a long, long, long time. And Angela wrote in 2016 is that placing the question of violence at the forefront almost inevitably serves to obscure the issues that are at the center of our struggles for justice. And can you just talk about that, how the violent, I don't know anybody that justifies some of the events that happened on October 7th. I don't know anybody who does. But at the same time, if we assume that that's where it all began, and the only issue is Palestinian violence, what can we possibly understand? So placing this issue of violence at the forefront is a way of ignoring all the history and all the systemic issues that actually result in the eruptions of that violence. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, thank you, Gabor. This is an issue that has always clouded struggles for liberation.
Yeah.
I can talk just briefly about the Black liberation movement in the U.S. And
Yeah.
there were, of course, those who advocated the use of violence, mostly for self-defense. And we were often interrogated about why we didn't take a position of absolute nonviolence. And when we pointed out that, self-defense is about defending not only individuals, but defending the right to be in struggle for liberation. But violence was always the central issue. And of course, that misconstrued the extent to which the state used violence against struggles for a better world. And it prevented people from recognizing the extent to which the state was in possession of the monopoly of violence. And so, young Palestinian people who use rocks to indicate their refusal to assent to occupation becomes the emblem of violence, whereas the tanks and the bombs of the IDF are not considered violence in that respect. So I think we have to talk about violence because violence does corrupt. Violence does, I mean, I would be happy if we didn't see any more violence in the world. But to assume that those who are fighting for a better world and attempt to defend themselves or attempt to express themselves through modes of violence that are oftentimes insignificant in comparison to the vast violence of militarism and armed forces, that makes it impossible for us to really understand the right side of history.
I think we can give one example of that in the very contentious and very sad issue of hostages. People say release the hostages, and yeah, it's
Oops.
Gabor, you broke for a second.
who were abducted October hostages will not be there. What we don't talk about. Okay, but so it's very sad about the hostages, and we all wish they were free. What we don't talk about is the hostages on the other side. In 2016 already, Angela wrote that about the thousands of Palestinians in Israeli jails, including something like, you mentioned that 800,000 men, this is by 2016, we're talking about 8 years ago now, 800,000 Palestinian men had been through the Israeli jails. 40% of Palestinian males, 40% of Palestinian males have been jailed by Israel at one time or another. 40%. And the numbers only gone up. And we talk about hostages. The orthopedic department of Al-Shifa Hospital, who was an orthopedic surgeon who saved lives. He was arrested. He was 53, a man in the height of his vigor and health, father of 6 children. He was arrested while doing his orthopedic work in Al-Shifa Hospital. He was beaten and tortured to death in an Israeli prison. The New York Times didn't even deign to mention it. And this time, Palestinian prisoners, thousands of them every year, children, are captured without charge. Not if there was, not that even there could be a legitimate charge against them. An occupying power has no right to arrest anybody for resisting them. If a child writes a sign saying, "Done with the occupation," they can be jailed. And they don't talk about the torture in Israeli jails. They don't talk about the fact, this is written in the Israeli press, that some of the prisoners taken in Gaza had their hands and feet tied so tightly that the circulation was cut off and they had limbs had to be amputated. And this has been divulged by Israeli physicians. You don't see a mention of it in the Western press.
Absolutely. And thank you.
And so that there's no all I'm asking for, and I think all you're asking for, is some equivalence of concern rather than this one-sided presentation of one party as always the perpetrators of violence and the other as just defending themselves.
Absolutely. And thank you so much, Gabor, for all of your work in bringing this lopsided assumption about violence and incarceration to light. And let me say that, I've had the opportunity on several occasions to meet Sahor Francis, who is the head of Adamir. And we have learned so much about the role of incarceration, those of us who do work around prisons. And let me say that that has been my first connection with Palestine, political prisoners and struggles around issues of imprisonment and our effort to create an abolitionist movement in this country that has benefited so much from the experiences and from the theorizing of the role of incarceration in Palestine, the role of administrative detention, as you were pointing out, the vast numbers of Palestinian men, the majority of whom have had some connection with the apparatus of incarceration. But we learned also that imprisonment is not an isolated phenomenon, that it is not simply about placing people within institutions of jails and prisons, that the society that has been created by Zionism, by the occupation, that it is a carceral society. We learned many years ago that we can't simply consider the issue as one of incarcerating individuals inside of a particular institution, that carcerality gets expressed in the checkpoints. It gets expressed in the fact that Gaza has long been represented as the largest open-air prison in the world, that Palestine has been represented as an open-air prison. So I think all over the world we've benefited from the experience of Palestinians with respect to the various modes of carcerality. You mentioned this in the beginning, but I'll emphasize the fact that when I was myself incarcerated back in the early 1970s, one of the most memorable moments of that period was a solidarity message that I received from Palestinian prisoners. The message had been smuggled out by their attorney, and it was brought in to my jail cell by my attorney. And I've always considered myself an internationalist, but moments like that emphasize and re-emphasize how important it is for us to feel connected across oceans, across geographical boundaries, for us to recognize that that we are one people. We really are, particularly considering the fact that we live on a planet that is one of billions of other planets in the universe and beyond. And the fact that it's often so difficult as a consequence of systems like racial capitalism and Zionism and colonialism to experience the affinity we should all have with each other is one of the saddest experiences and the saddest consequences of capitalism.